So much to me to present the Canadian Jewish Literary Award in Yiddish to Anna Miransky for poem by poem, fable by fable, discovering my father and learning his language. Poem by poem, fable by fable does more than celebrate the life of her father, Paris Miransky, one of Canada's foremost Yiddish writers. At the age of 72, Hannah studied Yiddish to read her father's poetries and fable in what was her first and forgotten language. She not only discovers her father, but she also gains insight into the experience of being a Holocaust survivor, being a member of Young Vilna, the celebrated Yiddish literary group, and the thriving Yiddish cultural community in Montreal. In an astute literary analysis, she probes why Paris Miransky had to write in fables to protect himself from harm, and why, as a Jewish writer, he chose the literary themes he did. Poem by poem, fable by fable, brings forward an understanding of the creative imagination and introduces the reader to remarkable poems and fables, both in Yiddish and in English translation. The book hit really close to home to me. My parents were survivors who settled in Montreal after the Shoah. My father was born in Vilna and peripherally a part of Young Vilna. When he arrived in Montreal, my father joined the vibrant literary Yiddish community that Paris Miransky became a part of. For my father, the new life was a love of Yiddish, poem by poem. Poem by poem, fable by fable is a biography, a literary analysis, a cultural history, and all these things add up to being a homage to the Yiddish Wort. So I want to congratulate Hannah Miransky.
Thank you, first of all, to Canadian Jewish Literary Awards and the jury for this great honor. I must acknowledge my good fortune in being given an extraordinary subject for my book and the raw materials for it by my father, Paris Miransky. He was a Yiddish poet and fabulist who arrived in Canada in 1949 after surviving the Holocaust. He was a member of Young Vilna, the last important Yiddish literary group in Eastern Europe. There is a slide of Young Vilna, I believe, that could go up now. This is a photo of Young Vilna taken in 1935. My father was invited to join the group in 1934 when he was just 28, becoming its youngest member. And the circle around the head is my father. His first book of poetry and fables, composed almost entirely of work written before the war and reconstructed from memory, was published in Montreal in 1951. His books, 5 substantial volumes, were published except for one in Canada, making him not only a Yiddish poet, but a Canadian one as well. For most of my adult life, I sparred with my father and judged him as self-involved and not particularly interested in being a father. From a narrow perspective, those were not inaccurate labels, but I did not know my father well, in part because he was silent about and preoccupied with his pre-war life and massive losses, in large part because his language of communication, the language of his soul, was Yiddish and would remain so until the day he died. My first language was Yiddish, but I lost the ability to speak it around the age of 6 when I entered school. And so throughout my father's life and mine, ours was an imperfect communication, him speaking to me in Yiddish, in which I had only a child's vocabulary and understanding, and me answering him in English, in which he was less than proficient. Almost everything important to me about my father I learned almost 30 years after his death. I learned it during the pandemic when I decided to read every poem and fable in his 5 substantial volumes, lined up, mostly unread, on my bookshelf. The last of these came out in 1991, only 2 years before his death. Although it started as a pandemic exercise, the process of reading and digesting my father's work was life-changing. It required a commitment to developing my fluency in Yiddish and much consultation with my friend, the Yiddish scholar, David Roskies. Because I am a psychotherapist accustomed to finding patterns, I noticed themes in my father's writing and organized the book into chapters reflecting some of those themes. One of the most important was my father's passion for Yiddish. There were numerous love odes to the language and to the Yiddish teachers and poets who inspired him, pre- and post-war. The prologue to his first book, A Licht für a Groschen, A Candle for a Penny, is an 8-line poem entitled Mein Lied, My Poem. I will read it in Yiddish first to give you a sense of the sound. Chotsch sis Ohren mein Lied, wie a Licht für a Groschen, schmelzt sich ones on Tisch von mein jiddischen Loschen. Nit par Yiskor Ashor, nit lepone Makadish, nor an Kegen a Bräut und frisch Wasser a Ladish. Although my poem is poor, like a candle for a penny, I take pride in its Yiddish language and its place on the table. Not for appearance's sake, not as a memorial candle, but right next to a loaf of bread and a fresh jug of water. My father's mission, his life-sustaining passion, was the continuity of Yiddish literary culture. He saw himself as part of a great literary tradition, still in its youthful beginnings, still developing new forms of expression when it was severed from its creative home by the Holocaust, along with many of the authors and readers who wrote in and read the language. My father was invited to join Jung Vilna as a fabulist. He participated in the reinvention of this ancient fable form and adapted it to write about modern concerns. He was inspired by a great Yiddish fabulist named Eliezer Steinberg. In Canada, he began to write what I came to call poetic fables, an innovative melding of poetry and fable. I will read one to give you a taste of his humor, his whimsy, and his spiritual wisdom. The first few lines in Yiddish, then the entire fable in English. It's entitled Brillen, Glasses. A Tate hat gebracht von Stott, trefft nur, was kein einfallne Taten, 2 Portionen Brillen für beide Jaten. Father's brought 2 lovely toys for his twins, 2 little boys. What a joy, just what they want. Both the boys are jubilant. Frolicking outdoors, behold the wonders of the world unfold. What a view, cries Elihu. Everything is blue, quite blue. Blue the earth, and blue the sky, even blue the butterfly. But laughing in a manner grim, Berele opposes him. Who says blue? From what I've seen, everything around is green. Quite green. Green the field and green the inn. Even you are green, my twin. Father, likely for $1, bought sunglasses of 2 colors, with blue for Ellie, green for Bear. He sowed the seeds of trouble there. A bitter quarrel's being fought, each son giving what he's got. One says green, the other blue. The fighting wanes, then starts anew. Then, amid the slaps and scratches, each one breaks the other's glasses. The fighting stops. The 2 stand stunned, dazzled by a golden sun. My book is led by my father's poetry, but it is not a book of poetry translation. It is a melding of biography, memoir, psychology, and Yiddish literary history. It is also a very personal recounting of my changed relationship with my father as a result of reading his poetry. In the afterword of my book, I enumerate some of the things I learned from reading my father's poetry and fables. I'd like to conclude here by reading some of them. I learned from my father how important it is to have a dream, how a mission, no matter how tragic and impossible, can keep one alive. I learned about the unique artistic and spiritual beauty of Vilna. I learned about my father's literary peers and mentors. I learned about the sustaining power of a righteous cause. Most importantly, I learned about my father himself. In bearing his own soul, he helped to make mine more whole. Thank you to the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards and jury, and to all of you here for this opportunity to honor my father.